Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Alka Gupta, and I will be your moderator for today's event. I'm excited to see so many participants joining from around the world. This webinar is an opportunity for us to come together and share our knowledge, experiences, and insight on digital disruption in public transit. You can share your questions in the chat section. We'll take them towards the end of the webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for today's session. First, we have David Kahale, Managing Director of Panther Group. David has directed Panther since 2016 and represents Panther in all international settings, including project development, infrastructure planning, and policymaking. Recently, David has started a new position as director at Biva Infrastructure Australian Division. Next, we have Swarnindu De, our co-founder and CEO of AllRide Apps and Innofied Solutions. With over 15 years of industry experience, Swarnindu manages technical and business development operations in both companies and has also authored several books. So without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers. Welcome, Swarnindu.
Thank you so much, Alka. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to have all of you in our webinar on innovations in public transportation. With me, I have David Kahale from Panther Group, and David has been part of different Panther-based company, Panther Pay, Panther Transportation, and we both have been part of the transportation industry for quite some time. So today we are going to talk about different type of challenges in the public transportation that we are seeing. We have been working with so many different companies and government for so long, and what type of solutions are out there, what type of solutions the government are looking for, and how we all can together bring a better public transportation system all around the world. So today this is the agenda of our discussion. We are going to talk about the challenges and the opportunities in the public transportation. Then we will see what are the power of digitization, the digital transformation that are improving public transportation day by day. We'll also see that different type of mobility solutions all around the world in 2023, how they are improving public transport in urban and other in the developing countries. As well as we are going to also talk about the data analytics and different type of smart technologies, artificial intelligence, IoT, and different type of sensors, how they're improving the public transportation all around the world. So with that, David, I would like to understand a little bit about it. Maybe you can quickly introduce how you are being part of the public transportation and how you are, what type of projects you are doing presently, and a little bit about Panther Transportation as well.
Of course. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me loud and clearly.
We can.
Okay. So I've been part of the public transportation sector since 2018. I specifically work with the Filipino government. Background in public transportation started in 2018 when I worked with the Department of Transportation in the Philippines and the various sub-departments that exist underneath that. It provided a unique opportunity to understand the challenges that developing countries face with public transportation, especially when the system was so fragmented and the planning was not in place for when moving into the 21st century. So the Philippine government and the Filipino population is quite huge. They have around about 120 million people and only one real metro city that exists, which is Metro Manila. The population of Metro Manila is around about 20 million people. So it's quite a dense population. It has a very dense, compared to the rest of the world, often being ranked number one in the world. So it presents quite a unique challenge, and I find challenges exciting. So my interest with public transportation really started back when I started university for the first time. And I'm based in Sydney, Australia. And at the time in 2012, when I first graduated high school, the Sydney's Transport for New South Wales had introduced a new digital payment system in the city called Opal. And the unique thing about Opal was it really offered a new kind of technological advancement in public transportation ticketing, and it made life easier for students because beforehand we had to wait up in ticketing lines. We had to figure out how much each ticket was going to cost us. Every around about 3 to 4 months, we would see an increase in the fares. And so for a lot of us who used to carry cash, it was quite difficult to try and understand how much it was going to cost us to catch a bus or a train to get to university. And a lot of times, a lot of university students would have to catch multiple modes of transportation just to get to university and then back. And at the time, I'm someone who doesn't like problems, because when I see something that exists that can very obviously be optimized, it kind of annoys me that they didn't think about it from the beginning. So just as I was sitting on the bus or the train going to university, my mind would race about the kind of solutions that could exist to optimize the systems. And then in 2018, when the Department of Transportation first reached out to Panther Group to see if we could offer them a solution, because we were a Sydney-based technology company, and we had a unique advantage of being part of that Opal system, I immediately jumped onto the opportunity because it offered a unique opportunity to be at the forefront and at the start of a unique technological advancement in an emerging city like Metro Manila. And since then, over the last 5 years, I've worked alongside the Department of Transportation in drafting the national standards for automated fare collection systems. I personally really put my foot down when it comes to the other transport industries that are coming ahead and trying to offer their technologies, which are very outdated, and they're trying to take advantage of the public. And so my real aim is to create something that is truly sustainable, affordable, equitable, and interoperable. And so my steadfastness in trying to achieve that has really put me in a unique position with the Department of Transportation in the Philippines in order to actually push this forward and make it a reality. And we're hoping that within by the second half of this year, actually, that the public transportation industry in the Philippines will finally see some relief from the solutions that we've built for them.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much for explaining. So, David, as you mentioned that you have been part of the different type of transportation projects for so long, and you have already working with the Philippines government for the same. So I'm sure that you have seen in the developed countries as well as the developing countries, all of us face different type of challenges in the public transportation, right? So where do you see the difference, like in the developed countries, the type of challenges they face, and in the developing countries, the challenges they face?
So the major challenge that I see with the developing countries is the lack of resources that they can implement an integrated transport system. Because at the time, in developing countries, they suffer from a lack of exposure to the unique technologies that exist in the market that allow this optimization to occur. And a lot of them are really starting from the ground up without any real experience with, say, a smart transit system. But the unique advantage that the developed countries, say, such as Sydney, London, or Singapore, they have access to the capital. And so, just as an example, the Opal system here in Sydney cost around about 1.2 billion Australian dollars and took 4 years to implement. The unique thing there is the $1.2 billion was actually affordable to the government at the time, especially with upcoming events in Sydney, wanting to be a world-class city. They kind of had the money to throw at that. When you look at developing countries, it's not really a priority for them to throw that amount of money into a system that looks fancy. Really, the main purpose that the government wants to serve is trying to serve the livelihoods of the population. And it's very hard to justify in a developing country that you're about to spend quite a significant portion of the city's GDP on an application. So that's really, I think, the main thing. The other main problems that we see in developing countries is the problem of congestion and the carbon emissions that is produced by the outdated vehicles. One of the things that we're seeing a lot is the fact that the regulations around public transportation is very different from vehicle to vehicle. So you may have tricycles with one set of laws, you may have a minibus with another set of laws, and then all of those vehicles on top of that are like 15 years old to 20 years old. And so a lot of them are
Right.
offsetting a lot of carbon emissions into the environment. And that's why you usually will wake up in the morning and you'll see a very thick layer of smog, especially around the times when everyone is traveling to work, because that's when
Exactly.
the most amount of vehicles is on the road. In developed countries, they've really invested in the higher end vehicles like Mercedes-Benz and Volvo, which have more advanced engines like Euro 4, Euro 5, and Euro 6 engines. And they're a lot more efficient with the carbon emissions. Cleaner air is produced as a result of that. And at the same time, they have a more holistic approach when it comes to the strategy of implementing public transportation, rather than allowing multiple small operators, say small businesses who operate transport companies, to operate just however they would like. There's a more holistic approach to the public transportation system, where you usually see one or two major transport players that have hundreds of vehicles within their fleet, and they service the large portion of the population.
Exactly. And when we are working with some of these companies at AllRide, we work with different types of companies all around the world. And when we are working with some developing countries, they also have a lot of issues when using any smart technologies, that they have a very low network bandwidth issues. I'm sure that you have seen that. And
Yeah.
that demands us to implement offline capabilities, or the edge computing, or having local data nearby, something that may ensure that people are having constant connectivity. So I'm sure that that is something you have also faced.
So it's especially so when you're in regional areas. And so when you're somewhere rural, you don't really have the internet connection. Sometimes the density of a city can also interrupt the GPS signals as well. So unless you have a robust hardwired system that's there as a backup for when these systems fail, then you run into a lot of problems. And that's, again, comes into the cost factor between developed countries and cities, and those that are emerging at the moment. And so, yeah, especially so with the internet connection. But another unique thing that I've actually discovered is a lot of the developing countries and the developing cities have a high adoption of internet connectivity. So a lot of them do have internet connections, but whether or not those internet connections are stable is another question. And so a lot of the time, it depends on the internet infrastructure of the city as well, because a lot of the times in developing countries, a lot of the users are sharing the internet nodes around the city. So rather than it being dedicated to each phone, you're kind of one building will have one specific set of hardware that's shared amongst all of the residents of that building. And the same will go when you're out in the streets. Whereas where you're in a more developed country, say as in city, like Sydney, you would have extensive 5G infrastructure with multiple high-level telecommunications companies, all servicing each and every customer, and also enabling the roaming. So there's a discrepancy in terms of that. But like you said, we actually, have to work towards something that's an offline solution that can actually cater to offset that challenge.
Exactly. And then there's a concept called edge computing, right? That is also something you and I also had a discussion, that having the processing, data processing closer to the location instead of sending it to the central server, right? So some way that will reduce the time or the network capabilities that is needed for doing advanced computing, right? So edge
Yeah.
computing nowadays is coming pretty much in as a savior in certain cases where the network capabilities are low. Now, in
Yeah.
terms of utilization, or you see that in all these developing countries who are not very much comfortable using mobile devices for public transport, in the age of Uber and on-demand transportation, we all are now much more in advanced situation for using, hailing cabs for going from one place to another, right? But in the public transportation, we do not see a lot of people are using it. Slowly, we are going into that. But don't you see that government, if they are implementing a digitization in public transport, it is going to be difficult for them to bring all their people, right, start using the system, what type of challenges do you see that may come in that case?
In my experience with the digitalization, it's been instrumental to transforming public transportation. Really, we've seen numerous examples of success stories coming out of digitalization of the public transportation sector. We have to consider the challenges that come into, obviously, when digitalizing. Like you said, we have to think of unique and innovative ways to make sure that it actually works for each use case in each city. But from the use cases that we've seen all over the world, it's actually been extremely beneficial, because what it does is it provides beneficial data to the public transportation agencies. So finally, they get to actually understand where congestion is being caused, what's the root of those causes, and make informed decisions about how we can solve those problems. And like you said, we have to offset some of the processing power. And right now, the issue around adoption of mobile technologies is really only held back as much as the government holds it back. So we've seen successful use cases of when a government implements a truly interoperable system. That means a system that can work with a lot of different providers rather than being just one unique solution that everyone then has to use. In many cases where the government implements a system where everyone has to adopt the same system, what we see is there's a resistance to adoption, mainly because it's revolving around having users to actually sign up for accounts, become familiar with the new technology, and a lot of the aging population is not comfortable with that. You see it different when it comes to the younger generations, but at the same time, you're going to have to compete on what features you can offer those younger generations, what benefits you can give them as well, and making it more interesting. And then that brings into play, okay, well, how do you strike a balance between something that's young and entertaining, but also services the older populations? So when you introduce something, say, like an interoperable system, this will allow, it's like sort of in India, the UPI. You can use multiple payments providers to pay for the various services. And that opens up the opportunity to have people who already have accounts with some other system to immediately begin using the service, rather than having to go through the whole onboarding again with a new service and learning how that works. Creating something that's quite easy to adapt, or something quite easy for you to automatically use without having to learn a new process, automatically makes the whole process a lot easier. And we've seen a lot of successful use cases in terms of that. But the thing we're kind of seeing at the moment is India is at the forefront, actually. The UPI is truly unique, and it's opened up a lot of financial inclusion. So we're seeing a lot of, no matter which class you belong to, you have access now to a robust financial service. In other developing countries, we're yet to see such a technology be implemented. And just from the use case that we're seeing from India, there's a huge potential for that to be a success.
Glad to hear that. Yes, the contactless technology is coming around, and that is one of the ways to start making people use the system. Okay, so I have seen that it is not only it is implemented in so many different cities, right? And it may become difficult, as you mentioned, that all the generation of people may not start using, digitization or smart devices to use for public transport, but they can start using one feature at a time, and payment is one of them, right? So as you mentioned about UPI, we all are now using UPI, right? And the whole generation, even the older people have now started using UPI for that. Now they have confidence into it. So that can be one of the ways to start making them use it in the public transport. The next step will be something similar, right? Like all these countries, in London, they have an Oyster card, right? So they provide this option to make payment with the Oyster card. Similarly, in Japan, they use Suica card. So they have already implemented this type of cards into the system, and that can be utilized for public transportation. In New York City also, they have this Omni card and different card based system that people can start using for making payments. So that makes life very easy, while continuously on a daily basis we are having daily commute. That type of cards or contactless payment system makes life very easy. So now you are already seeing that getting implemented. Do you see, David, this type of capabilities, all these cities I'm talking about, they are at the front run, right? Front part, right? But the cities
Yeah.
which are cities or the other places, they haven't yet started it. But do you see the government or the local authority showing interest in having a contactless payment or similar capabilities for transportation?
Yeah. Now, it brings up an interesting and unique perspective here, because from the perspective of developed cities like New York, London, Sydney, Singapore, from their perspective, they seem outdated. The use of, say, Oyster card or the Opal card now seems a bit outdated for them, because it requires too much hands-on experience, even though the populations are very familiar with the contactless payments in terms of in card forms. When we look at the developing countries and the emerging cities, they are actively looking to adopt this type of card technology. Now, the interesting thing that we have to keep in mind is the process of implementation. You can't simply just say, okay, we're going to look at what the most advanced city has and try and make that work immediately for a developing or emerging city, such as, say, Metro Manila, because you're kind of skipping the learning curve that the population will have to go through. As an example, I'll give you one from Sydney. We originally began with a paper card. So there were paper tickets, and on each ticket, you would have up to 10 rides that you were allowed. And it was a magnetic strip, and you would put it inside of a machine, and it would print with ink each trip that was occurred on the card. And then once you had reached 10 trips, you'd throw away the card. So it was wasteful, but it worked at the time, especially when coming just from a solely cash-based system. So we moved from a cash-based system to magnetic paper cards. Then the next move was the introduction of a T card, which was, as it's similar to the Opal system at the moment, but it was more niche. It focused mainly on the buses. And it was more of an introduction to the contactless payment space. And then we introduced the Opal system. And the Opal system is like what we now see in many of the advanced cities around the world, the contactless, NFC or RFID enabled cards. And the next step that we're seeing now for those cities is moving into completely digital. So removing the need for cards and moving into digital wallets. So, like the Apple Pay and the Google Pay type of things on your phone. Now, if we were to immediately go to a country that was fully cash-based and then immediately implement a completely digital system, you are going to leave behind and exclude a lot of the population that has not had time to learn about the technology or how to use it, or really have time to experience how public transportation would advance. Because all of these were quite instrumental on teaching you how to slowly transition into a fully digital or contactless method. So that's what we're seeing at the moment, and it's very important that we get the balance correct when it comes to the educational campaign on moving into that space. Now, the unique thing that's happening in the world at the moment since COVID-19 is that we're seeing a lot of cities adopting contactless payments. People don't want to handle cash anymore. People are now using cards and their mobile phones to make most of their transactions. In Metro Manila in the Philippines, within 1 year, and this is remarkable, within 1 year, 60 million people downloaded the digital wallet app GCash in the Philippines. And that's because it was fueled by a fear of not wanting to handle cash and the sheer convenience that digital payments now present. You can now access financial services without having to open up a bank account. And you no longer had to kind of figure out how to pay or how much money to carry on that day. Everything was already held there in your pocket digitally and more securely in a digital wallet. So we're seeing now a lot of the adoption in the developing countries of these digital wallet technologies. So it brings us to an interesting question. Has the public already kind of trained themselves to skip over that card educational kind of phase that public transportation has, and and moving more directly into the digital wallet space for majority of public transport users. Of course, you will have to have cards still there for, say, senior citizens or students or people with disabilities, so that they have an easier access to public transportation, but those cards will work on the same system. But now we're seeing that unique opportunity to kind of skip all of that and go straight into the digital space.
Absolutely, and that is something we are also seeing when you're working with different type of companies all around the world, specifically in the developing countries. When you are working on different type of projects, what it was 2 to 3 years back, where they are saying that our people, our customers, our users are not going to have a capability of making payment online, or maybe they are having a lot of issues in terms of security, that they don't want to make payments. Normal people, normal public had that concern. But in this, specifically as you mentioned, after COVID, a lot of payment gateways have emerged, and the system started becoming much more secured right now. So when you now we are creating these systems, I'm seeing that all these new businesses and whoever are coming into public transportation, creating a new bringing new digitization, they are saying we can now implement in the mobile payments capability, because now our users will be ready to make payments. So that is something has come up. Also, it has helped us having these integrations with lot of different type of payment gateways which were not out there earlier, because now all these payment gateways are present in the market. That made it easier for us to implement those systems and start making the users use it, right? So that is something we have also seen changing rapidly. So payment is one of the major areas that had to be improving into the public transportation system, and that is significantly changing as we are moving ahead. So that is one area that is making life easy. But then we are also seeing that with Uber and similar type of on-demand transportation coming up, that made a lot of people, specifically in the cities, very very much dependent on this type of on-demand transportation. So that while it provides a lot of comfort, lot of convenience, it also increases the carbon emission, right? And it also reduces the public transportation. It becomes a threat to the public transportation. So what are you seeing, or what do you think, David, that the government or should be implemented in terms of improving the public transport and making people rather prefer public transport over this on-demand transportation that is ultimately impacting the environment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, like you said, we're becoming heavily reliant on ride sharing now. It's kind of, we always had taxis. Taxis have always been there, and really there's been no issues with taxi availability. But the convenience now of being able to just quickly open up an app and tell them exactly where to meet you, and that's it. It's been booked. That's your vehicle. You don't have to scramble or fight with anyone else to get the vehicle. It's provided now an opportunity for different modes of transportation to emerge. And so what we're seeing at the moment around the world is the emergence of an ideology called mobility as a service. And this is kind of how cities are going to start looking like in the future, where you will be having an app that will give you different types of transportation that you can take. So it will recommend to you a bus, train, a bicycle, ride sharing. It will offer you all of the different mobility services available to you in your city. It's a more holistic approach. Like you said, we really need to focus on reducing the carbon emissions. And right now, with the emergence and really the reliance on the ride sharing, it seems counterintuitive because it means more private vehicles on the road that you're taking instead of the bus or the train, which is, arguably more, carbon friendly and environmentally friendly. So what we're then now seeing is that a lot of people are choosing to start catching bikes to go to work. A lot of people are choosing to take scooters and different modes of transportation, which is a good indication that people are becoming more environmentally conscious with their decision making on how they want to travel from place to place. And it's also providing choice to the consumer. We're now seeing an emergence actually of something new. So, mobility as a service is not too new, it's been around for the last decade. But there's a new service called transport as a service. And this is a study conducted by the University of Sydney, actually, who released a paper on this just last year. And transport as a service is the ability for, say, your employer to actually now offer transportation services in a way that's like the mobility as a service to their employees. So rather than the employee having to choose which modes of transportation they're going to take into work, the employer will pay, say, a subscription fee to, say, Uber or for a bike sharing system, and the employee has the unlimited access to those. And then that will encourage the employee to start using these more eco-friendly and environmentally friendly modes of transportation rather than relying on having a private vehicle themselves. Another emergence of the mobility as a service and giving them a more holistic approach to what is available to them is the fact that in new and emerging cities, especially in the developing countries, they have a unique opportunity to now redesign the way that transportation is done. For example, at a bus stop, traditionally a bus stop was only used for buses. A bus would come to your bus stop and that's all you could catch. But now the infrastructure itself can change. You can have a bus stop that has a solar panel on there that can provide you with convenience stores, and then attached to the bus stop you could also have bike lanes that you can attach the bike sharing to as well, and have them charge themselves. So they have a unique opportunity to now redesign the infrastructure around the public transportation and offer the public a more holistic approach, and more options, all within a more confined space.
Exactly, David. As you mentioned that, transportation as a service or mobility as a service, that is improving nowadays. As we are seeing that even if it is not public transport where everyone is there, instead of that there are small groups of people, right? And it becomes easier to provide transportation to the small groups of people. So that's why employee transportation, and then there are different type of van transportation, shuttle based transportation. Even I used to always drive to work, but now I have a little bit of dependency on a shuttle transportation that gives me a much better convenience to me to come to office, okay, and in a shorter time. So somehow these things are coming up where even if it's not for everyone, not for the complete public transportation, but in a group transportation, that part is slowly improving. So people are now moving away from only having a private vehicle. Instead they are going to a little bit of improved system which is giving them a group based transportation system. So that is easing, and that is somehow showing that the people are having, they are changing their thought process, and they are now trying to move to they are thinking about their city, and they are thinking about how they can impact also the environment aspect. Also in terms of the business model, like you mentioned about the business model, I'm sure that these are the type of business model that is coming up, where what it was 2 years ago, now I am seeing that so many different people and so many different businesses are coming to us on a regular basis. They are saying that earlier we used to provide airport transportation from a, like it was always be an individual private on a private vehicle, but now people are having rather more expectation for a van based transport. So now they are more moving towards having a group transport, going to multiple hotels for the airport transfer, than having a one-to-one transfer. So do you see that this type of business model, if they are coming up in terms of transportation as a service or mobility as a service, that will somehow impact the public transportation, may make people move away a little bit from the on-demand transportation like Uber, Lyft, and similar type of services?
I do, but there's regulatory issues that we have to face when we make those types of transportation available. For instance, every time I will travel to Melbourne, the airport has a dedicated Uber lane. So Uber itself now has this kind of unique space that you can only catch an Uber vehicle from, and it's quite high tech. when you go there. So the airport themselves have struck a deal with Uber to offer that type of service. When you look at, say, the Philippines really relies on these kind of minivans that can maybe hold like 16 people, maybe 10 people at a time, and it's more like a shuttle service. But this is, showing that the industry is moving in a way that's trying to reduce the congestion that's caused by private vehicles in these areas, which, just having a car sit there waiting to just drive off from the airport after it's already picked up the person for, say, like 20 minutes, that's a lot of just concentrated pollution in one area and unnecessary waiting. Whereas if you implement these kind of systems where you have dedicated lanes for buses or ride sharing, you streamline that service. You actually open up the current to allow those vehicles to go in efficiently, pick up who they need to pick up, and then continue on. Also, the governments are investing quite a lot of money to try and get more people from overseas, like tourists, into their countries. And the number one point of contention when people come into a new country is, how do I get around? Why is this so chaotic? I may never come here again. And so countries are very heavily investing in, say, like the airport infrastructure to usually to have a train station that goes directly from the airport to different parts of the country or inside of the city, and then offering these kind of more concentrated vehicles where you can have up to 10 or 20 people per vehicle, and then taking them to key locations that then they can go from there. It's actually making it a bit more efficient. And so we're seeing a lot of emergence in that space.
Great to hear that. So with that, let us move to the power of digitization. As you mentioned, that it is reducing the traffic, it can help you in the increased productivity. In terms of implementing intelligent transportation system, or do you see that how government is implementing a better traffic based system? The traffic systems are also improving on a daily basis, right? So do you see that that is something coming up, or that is something the government is taking time to implement?
It's definitely takes time. The number of cities that have this, you can probably count on your both hands, that have an intelligent integrated transport system that shares data amongst the agencies to make it just easier for them to coordinate and plan out the city. So it's very rare, surprisingly. And there's a lot of countries that are, coming out at the moment with this new tech, the ticketing, the cards and stuff like that, but they're not even thinking about how they can integrate intelligent transportation systems in to make them make better decisions. They're really just focusing maybe mainly on the payment side. The thing about the Philippines, from my work there in 5 years, is they do not have the confidence to implement a integrated transportation system because of the number of agencies that exist in these cities. And so it's not usually just the Department of Transportation, but then you have the Department of Public Works, you have the Department of Roads, you have the Department of something else, and the Department of Fare Collection, and the list goes on. And each of these departments has a director, deputy director, different teams, and it's going to be a nightmare for them to be able to share the data amongst each other, but also train the officials on how to use the system. So there's a lot of fear about trying to adopt these systems because in a lot of cases, and we're going to speak about this a bit later on with the public-private partnerships, but what we're seeing is the government does not want to move into this space by themselves because everyone knows this, government is better at some things, but they're definitely not good at running businesses. And a city is like a business. And then when it comes to technology, you don't really want to give the government and say, hey, you build the technology. They don't have experience in building technology. They usually leave that up to the private sector. So, there's a fear for government to approach the technology themselves. Instead, they're waiting for those public companies to offer them that system and offer that training. So we're seeing that some countries are open to receiving it, but the players in the space are not there.
Exactly, got it. So along with that, in terms of the digitization, as you mentioned, that the concerns are there, but digitization is somehow improving the experience and everything. It also brings certain challenges, right? So there are certain challenges. Few of them we have already discussed, that it becomes difficult for everyone to adopt digitization. From for all generation, it becomes difficult for them. Maybe the today's generation, it becomes easier for them to start using it. But apart from that, what type of other challenges do you see with digitalization? Do you see that that may also impact productivity, that may also impact certain aspect of how we are thinking, that we are actually trying to improve public transportation, but that becomes certain drawback?
The two things that I haven't mentioned yet, which are challenges to the digitalization, is the cost of the hardware implementation to enable such a system. So currently, the traditional legacy systems that exist, with the major companies out there, like I probably won't mention them by name, but the companies offer technologies that are outdated, but the hardware themselves are extremely expensive. And to be able to efficiently implement this type of system, you have to have a hardware installed at every single street corner, just so that you can be able to accurately monitor what's happening and collect that data so you can make the informed decision on how to make public transportation better in the country. It goes beyond public transportation as well. It goes to the civil planning of the whole city. And you have to take that holistic approach, otherwise you're wasting money. The second challenge, and this is something that really affects the passengers and the citizens of the city, is the privacy. Because when you introduce digitalization on a massive scale inside of a city, you're essentially saying we're going to collect data on as many points as possible. We're going to see where you're going, how you're moving, when these vehicles are stopped, where this pollution is coming from. There's so many different data points that it scares the public. And so you see a lot of time an emergence of people protesting the technology, because for them digitalization is sometimes a very ugly word for some people, because it could mean that it could be used for nefarious purposes. You could have external hacking of systems. You could have different countries who are an enemy of your country hacking into the system and then seeing pretty much what all your citizens are doing. And then on top of that, when you usually set up a digital infrastructure for your city, the next thing we see are the CCTVs that come in as well. And that's what makes the public scared, because when they hear digitalization, they think, okay, now I am being watched. And people really want their privacy. And so that's one of the issues as well that comes up, which you have to negate with strong digital policies around privacy, how you're going to protect people's data, and then actually prove to them that what you're collecting is actually improving their lives. Because if you're saying you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the digitalization of a city, and then the citizens don't feel maybe after 5 years that anything's improved, where did that money go? And now why is there a system now watching over everything, and we still don't feel any benefit from this?
Absolutely, as you mentioned, almost every point you have mentioned. Also, I have seen that it happens a lot, that it becomes difficult for anyone who is bringing this. They also have to provide the previous system in place, right? It becomes difficult because not 100% everyone is going to move to the new system, right? So it takes time, right? The adoption takes time, and maybe if, even for a lot, huge number of years, then also you'll see that at least 10 to 20% people are still using it exactly the way they were using it earlier, right? So that creates a division, right? And that division sometimes becomes difficult for the whoever will be the authority to maintain both sides of the system and continuously invest in that.
That's correct. You usually will see the adoption rates reach a peak, and then you will then only slowly begin to see a marginal increase in the adoption of a technology. And it usually peaks around about maybe like 60 or 70% of people who will adopt the technology. But the other percentage that doesn't adopt the technology is usually those who do not rely on public transportation or this type of digital thing for everyday use. So for myself personally here in Sydney, they've introduced now the ability to pay with a Visa card or MasterCard. So for me, who doesn't now use a lot of public transportation because I work from home quite a bit, so when I go to use public transportation, like I used it today actually to go vote, what I do is essentially now I just use my Visa card on my Google Pay, and I will tap with the Visa card. So it's not really an adoption of the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that the government's gone ahead and put in. So with the Opal system, but it's at least given me another way to actually pay and utilize the efficiency of the system.
Got it. Got it. Wonderful. So with that, let us move to the innovations in the mobility solutions. We have talked about the digitization, but now the world is moving faster, and there are a lot of technologies coming up with the with new artificial intelligence based technologies. There are a lot of new things are coming up almost every day, and we have seen that, now we are getting some of the requests from different type of businesses who are providing one type of transportation services. Specifically, this is coming from the developed countries. Now they are saying that we have people going from place A to place B, and we want to provide them a hybrid transport system. So it can be that some part of it is going to be public transport, or we are providing a bus for that, and after that they will be able to take an e-scooter or something like that, and after that they are going to have a private transport, because that is what is supported. Maybe the whole journey is not supported by one type of fleet, right? So they are asking for a hybrid system implementation. So David, where are you seeing that even if the autonomous vehicles, it is taking time to come, but the electric vehicles are coming very fast. In India, we are seeing that at least 1 in 5 are now opting for an electric vehicle, and we have started working for implementing electric vehicle technologies already. How do you see that these innovations are going to be impacting the mass transportation system?
So we are witnessing rapid advancement in technology, especially around the autonomous vehicles at the moment. And it's interesting to see it happen at the same time that we're seeing the emergence of the mobility as a service sector as well. I see that autonomous vehicles, when they finally become the norm, and we're expecting it should become the norm really around 2030. Um, you know, even Tesla and Elon Musk has even said that really the aim of the Tesla vehicle is that you can open up the Tesla app and then order the vehicle and it will come pick you up. And there's other issues around electric vehicles, like how is the electricity being produced? What's the reliability of the grid for the electricity as well? There's different issues around, how the batteries are produced and how they're going to be recycled. So there's a lot of issues still that we have to solve around the autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. But at the same time, I don't see there being an issue really with both of them coming out at the same time with the mobility as a service. So like scooters, bikes, and different things like that. Because essentially it's going to come down to the user's choice. As long as we're providing options to the public to choose how they want to get around, that's the key thing. Because once you start taking options away from the public, then you don't create a flexible economy. You have to enable different types of modes of transportation, such as the bike sharing, the scooters, Uber, and the autonomous vehicles. These are just things that have to exist at the same time with each other. I see that autonomous vehicles is going to, really target a certain segment of the market, but you're always going to have people who are more interested in taking a bike, especially when it's a very short journey, maybe say within 1 to 2 kilometers. A bike is probably ideal. So you see a lot of countries and cities investing in public walkways. More walkable and livable cities is usually a term that we see a lot now. And then you also see a lot of biking tracks. Some people like to feel the wind in their hair, to experience nature as they're going. And really, remember, the point of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles is to reduce the amount of pollution in the air and make it more breathable and overall make the city more beautiful. So what's the point if everyone's going to be sitting inside a vehicle, an autonomous vehicle, when they can't experience the impact that vehicle has on the environment on the outside?
That is so good to hear that, David. That is something probably we are yet to see for the autonomous vehicles, but then somehow this improvement, right? That is something, the new, revolution in the mobility. Somehow that is probably impacting the traditional models also, right? The way it is already there. We are already seeing people are moving towards a different type of mass transportation mode. So do you see that this all these innovations in mobility that is somehow going to impact the traditional systems that are already in place in different parts of the world?
I see that, say, buses and trains will always be an integral part of public transportation, I believe, mainly because of just the sheer amount of passengers that they can carry at the one time. And because cities are developed in a way where we have very structured hubs and concentrations of, say, a commercial zone inside of one city, industrial zone in another, and a shopping zone. So, and usually the public transportation routes are centered around getting people and moving them in between those different points. And then in between, you usually have the suburban areas, so you have the homes of those people, and then stops are scattered in between them. I see what we can see in the disruption in that place is seeing those vehicles turn into hybrid vehicles. Like the buses could end up becoming hydrogen powered, they could be electric, running off solar. And then also the trains, we could see the trains becoming faster and more efficient. You might see a reduction in the use of trains from shorter distances and a more adoption of trains in longer distances. So you can get from one city completely, say, like 100 kilometers away to another city. And so that's when you start seeing those, because also we're looking at air travel is a huge contributor to global emissions as well. And so if instead of traveling domestically via plane, if we can have a technology that enables trains to get from one city to another in relatively the same amount of time, then that would be far more efficient than having to catch a plane to another domestic city inside the country.
That is pretty good to hear that. So with that, David, we also want to understand now, when so far we have been talking about specifically about the public transport and the bigger authorizations and the government, right? But then there are so many small private businesses, mid-sized businesses who are using a different type of mass transportation mediums, right? As I mentioned about shuttle systems, there are van system, different type of rental system. There are tour operators. They are using, multiple buses and different type of group transport capabilities. All these businesses, now so far they have been using a very old management system operation. Everything was manual. Now slowly they are moving towards digitization, and they have started using a better systems in place, better softwares in place. And then we are seeing that now they are trying to implement smart technologies. They are trying to implement IoT, and they are trying to implement artificial intelligence, right? And there are certain technologies slowly coming up, like there are predictive maintenance, right? So there, the way of maintaining the vehicles, the number of vehicles, if the numbers are increasing, it becomes difficult to manage them on day-to-day basis. At the time, maybe predictive maintenance is something can be useful, right? So advanced analytics that can help all these different transit agencies to predict what time the maintenance is needed, if there's oil change is required, if the battery change is required, if the engine is not working perfectly. So predictive maintenance is one thing. Demand forecasting, which is based on the data, that what type of data we can, analysis that they can do, and they can predict the future in terms of how many bookings they are going to get, how many customers they are going to get, and accordingly they can uh, work around it, because it becomes very difficult for them when the demand is more to incorporate that many vehicles or that many drivers. Getting all the drivers is one of the major issues all around the world. And the opposite is also true. When they have lesser demand, they have to continuously maintain their people and their vehicle, right? So predictive maintenance, demand forecasting, and then improve routes, right? The way the routes are maintained, so far it was always based on the driver, or sometimes it is based on what Google Maps provide. But now we are seeing that different type of route optimization technologies are coming up, where they are continuously showing that what is the best route to take that will ensure that there are less consumption of oil. So all these new technologies coming of artificial intelligence and IoT based sensors, are you seeing that that the rate of adoption is increasing among all these small medium businesses? And do you think that that is going to ultimately help them in reducing cost and improving revenue?
We're already seeing an adoption of this in the, more advanced cities, and it's been very beneficial there. But the use cases in the more advanced cities is it's only a handful of companies. Remember, that's operating all of these systems, and so a lot of those companies, even though there may be one or two or three companies, they're very, very large. And so they have the access to the capital that they build their own systems like this, and they don't really, this is kind of a second thought to them because really they're quite profitable. What we're seeing in the developing countries is because, like you said, there are small players, and there's many of them. What this type of technology offers them is the optimization of their business processes, the revenue forecasting, like you said. It's improving the transparency of what the revenue is. So it's enabling those smaller companies to go into a bank and actually show them the financial health of that business. Because like we're seeing in different countries, when they go to upgrade, say, a vehicle, and you're running on, say, a 15-year-old vehicle, and you're like, you know what, I want to be ahead of the competition and I want a brand new shiny vehicle and brand new fleet. They go into a bank and then they say, look, we're looking at a loan of this many million so that we can buy this many vehicles. The bank will ask them, okay, well, we're looking at your financial papers and it doesn't look like you have a lot of transparency here. It looks like this is just something that's written up by an accountant for you and we don't know how to trust this. And these systems now allow them to track revenue in a more coherent and more industry standard way, so that now they go, okay, well, we can now trust what you're giving us. And so it's opening up a lot of benefits for the smaller players inside of the industry. And then it's the route optimization means that you're getting a lot more out of the fuel that you're putting into the vehicles. You're also getting a lot more customers because the AI is predicting where customers are going to be. It can optimize the route for you and tell you maybe you should add an additional stop along this route so you can pick up more customers. Maybe even predicting to you, maybe add additional vehicles on this route, because a lot of the time you're just driving past because the vehicle is already full and there are passengers waiting at the stop. So this is a huge market that you're still missing. So all of this technology really feeds into those businesses becoming more profitable, and we're seeing an adoption of that technology. It just has to be affordable and it has to be accessible to those players, and it's beneficial that we develop those types of technologies for the emerging cities.
Absolutely, David. So, David, you are also mentioning about this public-private partnership, this PPP partnership that is somehow impacting the cities all around the world, and then that is also helping a lot to both parties, to the government and the private companies, right? So, tell us about how do you see that this is something so much beneficial for different cities and different countries?
So public-private partnerships have played a significant role in the modernization of public transportation, especially the infrastructure. So even myself, I've witnessed the successful partnerships being delivered by the private sector and the governments working together to include, improved service quality to their customers. It also gives the government a more predictable costing model so that they can forecast, okay, well, how much should we charge for certain fares on different modes of transportation, just to ensure the ongoing success and sustainability of that type of vehicle. So we have to continue to explore how we can use public-private partnerships to improve infrastructure in the public transportation space. And for a lot of people out there, they don't really know what public-private partnership is. And so what it usually is, I'll give an example that's probably more familiar to everybody. It's like the building of a highway. So the government wants to build a highway between 2 points. The private company will do a full feasibility study and say, okay, there are a lot of people trying to move from point A to point B. There's a lot of congestion. They run a lot of surveys, and a lot of the public are saying, we need a better solution. We're open to a highway. And so it's quite an extensive process that takes a few years to actually build up a whole case, because a public-private partnership has to be very secure because you don't want to waste any money. And then instead of the government essentially putting up the money and saying, hey, we will spend, say, $2 billion on building this highway. The government says, we will accept proposals from a company who's conducted this feasibility study and has quite a good understanding of how this is working, and they have some experience in the operation of this infrastructure. And they will accept the proposal from them. It will have a fixed cost. So the company will say, this is going to cost us $2 billion. And so that company says, we will put up the $2 billion and we will build the highway for you. And so inside of a public-private partnership, it's the government, which is the public, and the company, which is the private, partnering together to build infrastructure that is relevant and necessary for the public. And other things fall underneath public-private partnership, such as like build, operate, transfer structures. And this one is usually the most popular. And what it means is the private company will build the infrastructure and put up all the money for it. And they usually get investment from outside. Then they will operate that infrastructure for a set amount of time. Usually the time for, say, a highway is until the investment is made back, plus an additional profitability in the future, or a set amount of time, so say like 20 years. After that period of time, after the contract ends, the private company will then transfer, so build, operate, transfer. They will transfer that infrastructure to the government. And so when it moves and transfers back into the government's hands, it means now the public has ownership over this highway or the infrastructure. So it's no longer owned by the private company, but the government, what they've done in this process is outsourced the construction and operation of this infrastructure to a private company, which does it a lot more efficiently than the government. And they allow it to go on for about 20 years. And then after that, the private companies made a healthy profit in most cases. And then after that, they give it back to the government, and now it becomes part of the public infrastructure. And so now you have the public owning a part of this, goods and services that's produced the economic growth. So it's a good way to outsource the economic development on infrastructure. So it's a very unique model, and I think it needs to be utilized more in the public transportation space.
Great. But then there are certain relationships, not every relationship go very good. Some of them may turn into a sour one, right? So in that case, what type of cases do you see that the challenges can be there for this type of PPP partnerships? What type of challenges do smaller companies or private companies mostly experience?
The smaller companies experience the barrier to entry. So in economic terms, the smaller companies can't really afford the expense that goes into fully creating the proposal. It involves a lot of legal work. It requires the hiring of huge marketing teams, surveyors, research teams to actually go out and actually propose an infrastructure that has the market study behind it to say this is actually needed. Because the government is not just going to accept every proposal that comes to them. So it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. So you usually have startups not taking this route because it usually will take 5 to maybe even 10 years for a company to successfully have this proposal accepted by the government. And so if you're a startup, you don't have 10 years to wait for your business to say, okay, you now have the tick of approval to then build this infrastructure for us. And so they lack usually the experience in operating this type of technology. They lack the capital. And then at the same time, it's the regulations around the project. So usually investors will usually say, we don't usually invest in this country because we can't really trust it. There's probably a high level of corruption. If we put in the money and we start building this infrastructure, what happens if the government comes in, because it's a partnership with the government? What happens if the government rips up the contracts and says, we have a sour taste with your company, we think you're taking advantage? There's a lot of different regulatory things that they have to go around. So it's usually reserved for bigger companies. So that's why my work in the public-private partnerships space is to try and create an accessible route for smaller companies to take advantage of this model and prove that it can actually be done. And we're currently working on a PPP, a public-private partnership with the Filipino government. And so, really, when that is completed, it will really prove as a success case for the rest of the world that these smaller companies that don't have these billions and billions of dollars to throw at these programs can actually get this infrastructure done and still do it efficiently.
Okay. Thank you so much, David, for explaining the PPP partnership model. It is new for a lot of us, and you are already working in this sector, so that gives you a lot of knowledge about what works and what doesn't work. So that way, with for our attendees, we would also like to understand. I'm sure that a lot of our attendees are from the transportation sector, and they are into small, medium businesses or large enterprises working into different positions. So for businesses who are into mass transport or public transport, can you quickly tell us that what they can do to improve their present system, what they can do to improve their present business in terms of reducing time and reducing the time and cost both, and improving revenue?
When a company is going into the mass transport sector, the most important thing there is partnerships. Partner with as many operators and providers of mobility services within that city, because really the whole model of mobility as a service is providing the user with choice. And so as long as the user has a healthy amount of options that they can choose from, you're going to have a lot more customers using that app. So partnerships is key. The other thing is user-friendly interfaces and transparent pricing. So you have to have transparent pricing so that your user knows exactly how much they're going to be paying for a service. You can't really use, we're estimating you may pay, say, $15, and then the trip becomes $25. You put a sour taste in the customer's mouth. So it's key that you work alongside your partners to create maybe interoperable APIs that will give them a more accurate, fair estimation on when they're moving. So it's all about transparency and choice when it comes to that, and making the right partners.
Glad to hear that, David. Thank you so much. So, guys, with that, we are at the end of the webinar, where we can quickly discuss about what we have talked in this webinar. We have talked about the different type of challenges and opportunities are there in the public transportation. We have talked about the power of digitization, uses of technology, uses of the new artificial intelligence and IoT based capabilities, how that can help different type of public transportation services, the innovations of different type of mobility solutions in electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, how they are going to impact the transportation. And then we talked about the data analytics and different type of smart technologies, and at the end David explained to you about the public private partnerships and how that can be beneficial for different parts of the different public transportation in different parts of the world. So with that, we are ending this webinars, and now we can quickly take some question answers. So having a quick question answer. So if you have any question, feel free to just tell us in here in the chat, and we will be happy to answer.
We could also accept the questions in the comment section, where we share this webinar as well. I'll also happy to answer any of the questions inside the comment section, today, tomorrow, in the future as well. So if we're not getting in, any questions at the moment, I'm always going to be available to answer any questions and, help anyone within the transport and the mobility space, because we really want to see this sector grow and improve, because it really does improve the lives of millions of people, and it really affects the lives of billions of people around the world. So the more innovation we see, the more people who are coming into the space and really providing innovative technology, it's just better for everybody in the space.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. So we can now, I think if there is no question, we can finish it off. Alka, you can take it up and you can finish it up.
Yes, Swarnindu. Thank you so much, David and Swarnindu. It was a wonderful session, and I'm sure all the participants, all the attendants would be, happy to attend this session and If you have any question, feel free to reach out to us. You have our email address, and you can always reach out to us. And as rightly mentioned by David, we'll be able to we'll be happy to take up your questions even after this webinar. And a live recording of this webinar will be very soon be available for all the attendees, so that you can refer to it uh, after the event also. And you can always get back to us with your questions. We'll be happy to help. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a wonderful session. Thank you once again, David and Swanindu.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alka. Thank you,
Thank you.
Swarendu.
Thank you.